There are calls that we go on as paramedics. Everyone else has thrown their hands up. The cops, the fire department, they're thinking, we don't know what to do with this person. Let's call the ambulance and see if they can figure it out. Shoulda, woulda, coulda is a very dangerous game to play with yourself. And the guilt that can come with, I wish I had made this decision or that decision. And then mix in if just the trauma of seeing someone suffering or dying, those burdens, they break people. I've seen people and they completely switch careers. They get out of it. They don't want to do it anymore. They don't want to see it anymore.
All right, Will. It's good to meet you. It's good to talk to you about EMS and the workload that you're doing. Why don't we just get started with a quick introduction of yourself and your background?
Yeah, so my name's Will Berry. I'm the co-host of the Loud and Clear podcast. I'm a flight paramedic in North Carolina, and I've been in EMS for 16 years. Currently, like I said, flying, but a huge part of my career was running 911 in a busy urban city.
That whole career, everyone in it, there's just so many people that are running towards the scary stuff, right? What do you think sets apart the personality of those that are willing to run towards the danger versus those that are running away?
Man, I don't know. That's tough one. It's probably deep in your genes, right? I think the first thing I thought of when you were just talking was my heart is specific to EMS. And, one thing, there's usually some misconception in the public about how exposed EMS providers are to workplace risk. We're on the same calls as law enforcement, the fire department. We are not going into burning buildings, but we're taking care of the people that are pulled out of them. We are going into active situations with law enforcement. We're seeing death, dying, and suffering every single day. I like to remind people sometimes that our colleagues in the emergency department, they're exposed to a very high volume of the same tragedy and death. And unique to EMS is we're seeing all the stuff that's not viable, that's not taken to the emergency department. So just these horrific situations that are incredibly tragic, EMS is right there on the scene. And a lot of times when people think of first responders, they think of law enforcement, they think of the fire department, but they don't always immediately jump to thinking of EMTs and paramedics. And our exposure to the same workplace trauma is equal. We are very high post-traumatic stress incidents among EMS providers, very high burnout, very workplace stress. Like I said, the risk is very significant working in EMS, and there are calls that we go on as paramedics that everyone else has thrown their hands up. The cops, the fire department, they're thinking, we don't know what to do with this person. Let's call the ambulance and see if they can figure it out. That happens sometimes too.
So there's a lot more than meets the eye in terms of what you're dealing with and coping with in terms of stressors and what's causing the burnout. Give me some idea of what you're actually carrying when you hold that title as an EMT or paramedic.
Yeah, I think the first thing is EMS providers have an incredible amount of responsibility. So most paramedics, not all, but in many communities across the United States, it's common for there to be one paramedic partnered with an EMT. And so the paramedic has more medical training than the EMT. In those situations, sometimes the paramedic is faced with very critical decisions about how to care for a very sick or dying patient. And they're making those decisions alone. Now, not everywhere. Some systems, there are multiple paramedics on scene. But that's an incredible amount of stress. And you deal a lot with, shoulda, woulda, coulda. That's something that when I was in a supervisor role, I would talk openly about with the folks I worked with. Shoulda, woulda, coulda is a very dangerous game to play with yourself. And the guilt that can come with, I wish I had made this decision or that decision. And then mix in if just the trauma of seeing someone suffering or dying on top of that, those burdens, they break people. I've seen people after they'll say it wasn't from a specific call, and it probably wasn't, but there definitely was a straw that broke the camel's back, and they completely switch careers. They get out of it. They don't want to do it anymore. They don't want to see it anymore. Sometimes that's even best case scenario, because some of those folks even choose to commit suicide, which is awful. Back to your original question, what prompts someone to run into danger? When you kind of put on that uniform and you almost assume this role of of I represent something to the community. I'm not just Will anymore. I am a paramedic. I came on the ambulance. You called 911 and I showed up. I believe law enforcement and firefighters feel the same way. It's not so much that you've put on like a cape, like some people joke like their uniform is like their superhero cape. It's not that. It's almost like I have to. There's a burden there. Like these, whoever the public was faced with a situation that they felt like they could not solve. They didn't know what to do. It was overwhelming, and so they called 911, and we came. And we have to do something about it. No one else is coming. It's us.
I can feel that burden while you describe that of like, there's nobody else but me to save this situation or this, and if I don't, this person dies, which is a ton of pressure every call, right? And I don't think you ever get, relief from that expectation, whether that burden of each call comes right away or if it layers on as you realize the intensity of the call. But to me, I think a lot about some descriptions from first responders as they describe the burden that it would cause others for them to need help or support, and their unwillingness to accept maybe an EAP or an offer to help for their own help and wellness is part of that. I'm the helper. I don't need help. Is that fair? Tell me about that.
Yeah, no, you're hitting on something that is kind of deep in the culture of first responders, and it's really hard to put your finger on, but I think one aspect that fuels it, when you go on 10 calls in a shift and you feel like this isn't always true, but this is some of the feelings you can start feeling. Like, these people can't solve their own problems. I have to solve them. Sometimes you are actually saving a life. Sometimes you're just that calm presence that's level-headed and is offering a new perspective to a situation. But you go to two people fighting and the police have separated them and they want you to evaluate both of them because they, have bumps and bruises from being in a fight. And you deal with that over and over and over again, and that kind of mounts and builds, and like the cumulative toll that can take. You don't want to be another block on that tower to your coworker or your friend. They're dealing with enough. You're dealing with enough. And you begin to believe this narrative that like, well, if I tell my friend I'm struggling, I'm just like the people we run on the ambulance. Like, I'm just giving them one more plate to spin that they can't spin. And that's not true. It's a lie. Your friends would rather help you than probably anybody else. But that's not what you believe. That's not what you tell yourself when you're in those shoes.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective to actually think through. Am I adding to the problem or not, right? But what's heartbreaking is average 70% divorce rates, right, amongst emergency responders, and the amount of people that do hit that wall of burnout and fatigue and say, I can't do this anymore. Really, like you're saying, if there are people willing to help them and to be supportive, at least through their journey back to recovery of some level, that, it doesn't seem like we need to wait until we're in our own personal crisis to accept and get that help. So how do we start to make a shift or a change for those of us that are trying to make a difference in this space?
Yeah, I think the tide is slowly turning, but a posture of maintenance, you don't wait until your engine blows up to take your car to the shop. Hopefully you don't.
Or to change your oil. Right?
Yeah, you change your oil, your check engine light comes on, you take it, you get the mechanic to look at it. You ideally do preventative things along the way. It's so easy when we have you break your arm, it's visible. I can look at it and say, this is broken. I need to have surgery. I need a splint. I need to do rehab. I need to do these things. The mental health things we're talking about, they're internal, and we think they're hidden. But they're usually not. They're coming out other ways. They're coming out sideways. And we may hold it together at work, but your coworkers know that you drink too much alcohol, or you're getting a divorce, or you're in significant debt. I mean, these are all things that I've seen firsthand. I've walked with peers through these things, and it becomes the norm. It's all super complicated and interconnected because you have to remember too that first responders, normal to them can sometimes become slightly askew, because think about what you're going to all day long. Like if you take the whole spectrum of society, you're responding to this small window of the worst things that happen in that society. And so to compare yourself to that or your situation, that's a skew of what normal thriving can be.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of that, I think, cultural change and that shift, right? Today, it looks like alcohol, really dark humor, all these coping mechanisms that are culturally acceptable or tolerable. But I think peer support is starting to make a move in terms of increasingly more adoption of saying, look, I I trust these particular individuals. I know that maybe some people are joining peer support teams, and I'm not going to trust all of them. But there might be some that I trust if they were to get trained and join the team, that could be a really effective solution. You know what? So from your experience, what's a structural change, or how do we look at uh, empowering and increasing the use of peer support teams, and how can they be more proactive and not just waiting until a peer is at the very edge?
I think specialized purpose-built peer support teams are powerful and effective, and they have their place, and they can't be the only tool, because if you're waiting on a specialized team to respond to whatever you have going on, probably not going to happen. The people you're going to lean on the most is that person on your crew, your partner, the person riding in the front of the ambulance with you. That's who's going to notice first. That's who you're going to feel most comfortable first, usually, And so equipping everybody with some level of awareness and training, and then also teaching all first responders these things get said all the time, but there's an element of truth that we all have to own, and that, the more we talk about it, the more the conversation's open, the more it becomes normal. And I'm thinking about, we all get told to work out and take care of ourselves and all these things, but we have to remember that does come from truth, right? If we're taking care of our body in many ways, our mind follows. And so all of these things, these are all building blocks. There's no magic bullet to this problem. These are all building blocks that we need. I was on a peer support team for several years, and I took part in some amazing, like, structured debriefs for significant events. And I was told personally it was impactful. And I hold that intention with, I know people, the call that really kind of broke them wasn't a big sexy call. Let's say you go, it was not uncommon when I was working on the ambulance, we would respond no lights, no sirens. So it's not even being coded by 911 as an emergency, technically. And you arrive, and there's somebody in significant mental health, having one particular call. This patient was a veteran. He reminded me of a friend I had that was a veteran. And this man, his life had completely fallen apart, and now he was addicted to meth. And this came in as a non-emergent call. And honestly, like, after that one, I was done. Thankfully, I was working with a really great partner that day, and I just remember openly weeping to her. And we stayed out of service for a while, and she got it. She was like, what's going on? And I told her all about my friend. I told her, like, how this call reminded me of him, and this was at a time in my career that corresponded with significant combat, in Iraq and Afghanistan. And this friend that I had, I didn't know where he was. I'd lost touch with him. I didn't know if he was alive. That was it for me. The rest of our day, luckily, we kind of skirted through and didn't have to run anything else. But there are plenty of people in the first responder world that have an experience like that. Then they don't take themselves out of service or whatever, and then they have a really significant traumatic event on top of that. That problem is on everybody. That's on you as the frontline first responder to be aware and speak up. And it's really also on people in positions of leadership to put in place systems and ways to have awareness and trainings, so that you have multiple layers to try to catch these folks and help them, because the end result is a lot of burnout and a lot of turnover. And as a frontline worker, that's just bad. I lose my friends. I don't want to do that. I could lose myself to this. I don't, I could say, you know what, I'm done. I don't want to work in this job anymore. But also, if you're in a position of leadership, you're losing the most valuable thing you have, your people. Think about how much it costs to train new people, recruit new people, hire new people. Like, wouldn't you rather keep the people you have and make them healthy and great?
Absolutely. And I've heard numbers from 100,000 to 300,000 for police, fire. I'm sure EMS is more because you've got more medical training and involved with all of that. And I love that you called out, that there's an opportunity for anyone in leadership to do something here. What kind of ideas do you have for like maybe one concrete structural change that a leader can look at their department and start implementing even today in order to start heading in the right direction?
The first thing that's incumbent upon anybody in a leadership role is to listen to the needs of your frontline staff. If you have a lot of people that are leaving, and the thing that you're hearing over and over again is, oh, they decided they want to be a different profession. Oh, they're getting out of law enforcement. They're getting out of EMS. They're getting out of the fire service. And you think, oh, well, Will just really wanted to be a realtor. Will probably didn't want to just be a realtor or whatever it was. He felt like he had no other option other than to leave the career field.
Yeah.
So if you feel like
Because
you're
he's
turning over
falling
a lot,
apart at the seams, right? Like there's
right,
no way to hold it together again and still keep doing this job.
right. And so if you feel like you're hemorrhaging people, the first thing you need to do is take a look at your agency in the proverbial mirror and see if there's anything you can do. The other thing is engage your staff about what would work for them. I think there are large scale initiatives that can be done, trainings you can do, protocols you can implement, and those have their place and they're valuable. But again, if it's handed down from high above, people aren't going to want to do it all the time.
Yeah,
And
we have
so they
learned
need to
that
feel
time and time
safe.
again.
They need to feel safe. It has to be grassroots. And so that starts, in my opinion, with listening. Being a good leader is being closing your mouth, listening, being humble, even when you probably know what people are going to say, and start with that.
Yeah.
This is a very vulnerable topic for people because ultimately tied into this, whether they verbalize it or not, is some sense of, I can't do this job anymore. And when you've worked really hard to get to where you are, especially if, let's say, you're the type of employee that's received some praise, maybe you've been on some high profile incidents or some high speed incidents and people have praised you, patted you on the back, you did a really good job, you stayed calm, you stayed level headed, that sort of thing. You feel like you're flushing it all down the toilet if when you're struggling and you have to leave, or it's a big identity hit.
Pretend I'm that guy. I'm at that point. I'm ready to quit. I've put my whole life into this, and my quitting could be burnout and I'm done with the career, or it could be I'm ready to be done with this life. What's your message to me?
Hopefully you're not
I'm
ending your
not.
life. That'd be bad.
But there are guys
That's a different
that
conversation. That's tell me how you're going to do it. Give me your gun, and we're going to go get some help. Um,
I
yeah,
appreciate
I mean, I
that
think,
those safety standards, right? But
yeah,
not every guy's going to be open about it, and they're not going to tell you they're in this position. But I want you to share with me your message, knowing that I've been exposed to all this and I have not yet accepted help, so that
mm,
I can get your voice out to those guys that are hearing it from you as one of their own.
yeah. So my story, there was a leader where I worked that I really admired. I looked up to him. I thought he was really competent at the job. I was proud to follow him. I really had a deep amount of respect for this person. He had an incident happen actually not at work. And we heard kind of through the grapevine that it had rattled him because he was with one of his best friends and his best friend had almost died. And then he was going to talk to a therapist. And when that happened, we were like, dang, if he's talking to somebody, like, it must have been bad. Fast forward, I had a horrific incident. I had a horrific incident that significantly touched me, regarding like a pediatric patient, which is really common in our field. Because I knew that leader's story, I pulled him aside and I was like, hey, I want to talk to somebody. I don't know how. I don't know what to do next. I heard that you had done that. What do I do? Thankfully, where I worked did have a process and a protocol to get you within 48 hours into outpatient behavioral health. He pulled that string, and I was in someone's office for intake in 24 hours. And when I finally sat down with the therapist, which was very uncomfortable for me, she ended the session by saying something to the effect of, "Do you think other people you work with struggle with this?" And I said, "Probably, but we don't talk about it." And she was like, "That blows my mind, because the number of you that walk through these hallways, it's got to be close to all of you."
Hmm.
And that was mind blowing to me. So like most of my coworkers were going and not telling anybody about it. So I tell you that story to answer your question. What would I do if you were my coworker that was struggling? I would tell you my story, because I can tell you till I'm blue in the face, you need to go talk to somebody, you need to call EAP, you need to reach out to this, that, and the other and do this protocol. But until I normalize it by telling you the story that I have and what I did and how I received care, it can feel insurmountable, and it can feel like you're putting the scarlet letter on your chest, which is not true.
Yeah, and I appreciate that probably more than a lot of people would understand. In that, no, I lost a brother to suicide after he was
Mm.
in the military. I have brothers with PTSD that have dealt with all of the onslaught of consequences that have come from that really volcanic eruption that comes when you don't take care of it. I have a stepfather that's firefighter and a similar end of road experience. And I'm just extremely grateful for the successes of those people like yourself that at some point had to really, as my stepdad put it, put your pride on the shelf and get yourself some help. And like you're saying, more people are open to it and accepting help than we even realize. But we're so nervous about it breaking down our reputation and our perception that we've worked so hard to build, and that I'm competent and trustworthy. And the thing is that it doesn't deteriorate your someone's ability to trust you to be their resource the next time you're called out. It increases it. You have more of a capacity to be empathetic and understand what others are going through when you finally let yourself get taken care of. There's such strength in this story, so I really appreciate you sharing
Yeah,
that.
yeah, you're spot on, and that doesn't get enough lip service, if you will. Everybody focuses on this crisis moment where like you we have to make the decision to do something about it, which that's an important moment, because we know when that goes unchecked, that can lead to suicide, which is not what we want. But what people don't often talk about is how much stronger of a person you are when you go through this process and you come back more resilient.
And more approachable, and you can be more helpful to more people, and you're looking for more opportunities. It's just as a natural consequence of us getting broken down and being built back up. And the term is post-traumatic growth, right? It's the ability to take your pains, deal with them, cope with them, rely on God and his involvement as well in guiding you through and growth in these steps, and being able to turn around and say, man, as I recover from that, I can see that I was able to grow and I've become a different person in a way that I feel deeper or more enriched personally, and I can be of more value to those in my influence.
Yeah, well said.
Awesome. Well, appreciate everything that you do, and for being willing to be one of those guys to go get yourself some help, and for sharing your story with those individuals that needed to hear that today.
Yeah, absolutely. One huge soft spot in my heart for EMS providers. You're in the thick of it. A lot of people don't realize it, and take care of yourself. And then, yeah, huge love for all first responders. We're seeing the sides of our neighbors and our society that all of our other neighbors want to pretend like it doesn't exist, whether it's marginalized people, whether it's sickness and disease or death and dying, we're going into that in our own neighborhoods and communities. And that is a huge calling. And thank you to everyone doing that. And also B, take care of yourself. It's not easy.
Yeah. And there isn't a person on earth that doesn't deserve that kind of love, respect, and support, right? Both from the perspective of you're called to an emergency, to an individual with needs, you're going to help them. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Someone's in need, you're going to help them. That's what you're called to do. And I just want people to feel like that's okay if it's you. And it's not going to
Yeah.
be you forever. There is light at the end of the tunnel. There's more advanced trauma techniques that can give you, like accelerated resolution therapy. 80% trauma reactivity can be resolved in one session. So one session, you can feel loads better. And the more we learn about the nervous system and how we're actually being neurologically affected by these calls and these bad scenes, that we can treat them more efficiently and use these rapid recovery techniques and bring ourselves back to gold standard. So I just want to make sure we're passing along that encouragement that there's more, there's better, but it's not weakness. If anything, it's not logical, it's biological. And taking care of your body and being preventative in your maintenance, it will make all the difference.
That's right. That's awesome, Aaron.